Without mutation, you get too distracted too easily by what you prescribe yourself needing to maintain the adaptions. When you have an excess of sunlight or UV rays shining on, a small plant or a human body, it's introducing energy which perturbs the system enough. Mutations are necessary when energy is brought into a system which cannot handle it normally, right? Like, I like this idea of saying, like, metamorphosis or mutations need to be analyzed for how good they really can be. Mutations really connect with how we talk about getting somebody out of a cyclical pattern or habit or addiction, right? When you're addicted to a sort of adaptive behavior, it becomes very hard to imagine yourself breaking free from that. And that's where I think mutations are sort of vilified or sort of become sort of an enemy to stability, under the assumption that said stability is where you ought to be. And seeing, like, even in our world, we sort of like use mutation as sort of such a sort of derogatory or power depleting term instead of a power emboldening term, even though we completely admit that even our own existence is purely due to a mutant history and not really that of a so respectfully and coherently adaptive system. That's why it's so nice when you have a space free of certain fear, free of certain, as I've said before, like sins of certainty, places where people are so constrained to where they have so much faith in their adapted existence compared to one in which can bear the chaos of mutation, one that can bear the difficulty of breaking down certain adapted behavior, because truly that's a sign of strength, of a sign of, even like if we look at like genetic systems, when you can be perturbed and not have your entire, I'm saying species, but that makes it weird in a weird way to say it. When your plant bed gets a disease, it's very nice to make sure that it can handle its own weight due to its own variety, its own ability to make solutions out of a difficult pool of bundled incoherent energy. Right? Like that's why we value that principle of like diversity, for example. It's horrible how fear of mutations reveals a weakness of general, like, intellectual, genetic, like, athletic diversities, like skills in which require you to push and pull different muscles of your system to really uncover how we're able to exist in a growing greater power, and in our world, like a greater systems of inequalities and whatnot. And I think for us to talk about these things and be forced to adapt our language to points that make us repeat such easy to live with talking points or such easy to live with quick solutions, and to not educate our people in the bigger picture on how our world is comprised of that adaptation and mutation respect, and get your young Disney movies to teach people critical big pictures, have our news and affiliations of media like respect that idea more, and create platforms, media platforms, educational platforms, entertainment platforms in which, like, educate people to have the freedom to enjoy the weird mutations in which make their life both the most beautiful it can be as well as the most difficult and ever growing it can be. Um, Being stuck with adaptation is sometimes fantastic, and sometimes you're on an arc in which pushing harder is simply the best thing that you can imagine yourself to do. But certain arcs are destined for certain condemnation, and I hate seeing people on arcs that are actively eating their fucking toes and not I don't know, not being told to break free with it, whether it's your friend or whether it's your family or even your coworkers who are emboldened by that like consistency is really tough. And I guess having that sort of like support circle or having that sort of like network to communicate that is what a lot of people fail themselves on when you're subject to, say, the internet or mass media, and you no longer have friends that help remind you why you're valuable and also not providing value to certain people, certain spaces, every step of the way. Whether it be the way that you're, giving your opinion on a piece of entertainment, whether you're, helping choose what way that you celebrate or what you choose to celebrate in the first place is dictated by how you value and reward things that keep you alive, and whether that's stuck in sort of a conserved adaptation basis or whether that's surrounded by people who are constantly chasing survival in the face of mutations, whether good or bad, you philosophically tend to different groups due to the way that you're educated and allowed to respect the ways in which we survive. And if you are steeped with adaptation, you're steeped with comforts to the way you know how something ought to be, and the benefits and deficits that come with that, or you're one who's learned to ride the waves, so to speak, and live in that state of mutation and not have to bear the weight of the strength that comes with we see sometimes just a incomprehensible dedication of time, energy, and strength to just one sort of thing versus the innumerable benefits to traversing large breadths of area. And we have a whole world of people that go into and out of those stages. Some people enjoy arcs and eras of consistencies and building, and sometimes you get mutated into a whole new character. And the way that we communicate with each other very often, most often, fails any form of respect for that part of the conversation online. Even now, how we talk, when we defer to our roots of trust in such like nebulous, sort of flattened communicative spaces. What do I mean by that? Nebulous, like hard to find the sources of your sources, hard to basically enjoy, enjoy some sort of liberty in expressing yourself without having to conform to someone's sort of tightened up view of what they've been surrounded with or what they've been surviving on, basically. But that's a huge issue, right? That's just like, in general, the education of that simple idea of the difficult ways that we communicate, and how I argue awareness and education and eradication of fear in the ways that we have proven to be so weak in execution to be what brings us to a better method of understanding why we all think we're doing the right thing. Because that's the biggest problem, is that when you look into each case, you steep yourselves with the troubles of the people in which you indict, and you recognize that often it's a, yes, stupidity, but also righteous attempt at providing the best image of what you see for the world at that time, and in that place, which is why it's so difficult to communicate to these people. And these people, I mean by all people, is that everybody thinks they're doing the right thing. And that's sort of been the biggest goddamn problem, is we're all inappropriately educated to bias ourselves to believe that we're incapable of of being complicit or being a participant in systems in which actually do hurt a lot. We're not exposed to how vulnerable both we are and how culpable we are. I don't know if that are culpable or capable of actively participating ignorantly in worlds that are very powerful and harmful, on purpose. And that's the scary part. It's like very much so on purpose, designed bespoke solutions to make sure that we are living in a world exponentiated and exploited. And that's like hard to get across when everybody thinks that they're doing the right thing out of a nebulous instance of a population victims of scale. And that's like a lot of what I've talked about here, a lot of like safety, a lot of vulnerabilities, a lot of methods by which the miscommunication becomes the communication, which therein builds people emotional gildings, powerful rationale to excuse them of behavior in which they're believed to be doing in good faith and for good effort. What do you do with that? You have to not give up and not stop believing that they can still do that thing that they view as right without a absolute mutation away from their known adaptations. Not saying that their whole training, their whole energy put into the decision-making engine they have is not for naught. It's not a waste, but it need be capable of bearing more weight than it was ever engineered with which to provide, right? Like, that's what's so tough, is that we have no clue what that engine can support. And that's sort of the big guess, is that when you unravel that, when you ask people to see what they can do without being in an environment in which they've been so successful, they are scared. And so I think that's just, we have to ask ourselves, how much can we bear to change when you're trying to actually do it for the better and not just be scared and not just be, I don't know, told stories that make you never change from that pain, I guess. Because that's, I think, why do such good faith actors feel like it's so hard to break out of that? It's because it's currently engineered to be that difficult. It's so hard to connect on the things you can while still showcasing how powerless you are, knowing what things can be done. So that's why it's important to talk a lot about it. It's important to build trust in spaces and where your only goal can be to fight trust-breaking behavior. You have to use tools in which embolden that, because there are existing endless methods of social engineering to break down that attempt at building trust. And it's an arms race, like I've said, and it's like not and never has been easy to teach people methods of critical thinking as we limit the need to produce the critical thinking yourself, as we have systems in which do some of the most edge-casing critical protections for us, from banking to software engineering to relationships to anything. We no longer respect the cost it does require to maintain systems so perfectly good that we have in our world. And when we don't connect with that trust, we stop respecting the prestige that people who have done things successfully have garnered, and respect why that is necessary. And when that happens, you're fucked. You need to be able to respect really good effort put into medicine, put into engineering, put into people doing things well. But when that is hidden from you, you don't build an education for that difficult process of persistence and energy